So let us finish our stakeholder approach. So I think what we discussed last session on Wednesday, Tuesday was like we defined, as you hear, what is stake, right? What is interest and what is stakeholder and how stakeholders are different from shareholder and why concerning not only your shareholder but why company need to concern all other group in interest. So the point here is that there are many stakeholders. So the realistic question is that you just cannot manage that many stakeholders, interest group, right? Many groups this day in domestic market, other country, foreign market as well. So you have to choose a specific target group, right? So how do you know that which group is the most important stakeholders? That is the question, right? And then once you determine a specific shareholder, a stakeholder, then how can you develop a specific plan to satisfy that stakeholder group? So that is actually what we are going to talk about today. So before we talk about it, we just defined what is stake. So we know that 3 different types of stake, somebody who owns your companies, what I call ownership, right? So if you buy some share, that is also the stake. Also, a group of people who has the right to claim something upon what your firms are actually doing. So a kind of a group that has a right in a legal term or moral aspect, that is also kind of stake. And other than that, any third party, bless you, any third party who has the kind of a concern for your firm's activity, like climate change, you know, that the kind of a strategic priority these days. So your firm's operation may be affecting kind of a climate, environment, and so on. So for that respect, many groups also expose themselves to that kind of environment. So that is kind of interest as well, environment mostly. So that is also the stake. So many types of stake here. So considering that, we can say that, as you see, that many stakeholder group we can define, right? Like before we talk about more specifically, we just try to look at briefly how that stakeholder approach actually progressed in the past to the point as of today. Like we know that we will learn later lots of concept in business does have a very short history. We have only very 50 years or 60 plus years of management and business history, which means that in academic term, our history of the management is quite short. So somewhere at the beginning of 20th century, the stakeholder approach was pretty much production view, which means that what you need to care when you manage the company is simply maintaining the right, correct relationship with your supplier. So there are many stakeholders, but you only need to concern your suppliers, because suppliers are actually providing the materials from which you make some food, the product or service. So that's all about stakeholder relationship in the past, like 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, right? So production view was simply say the most important stakeholder to your firm's operation is supplier. However, that view simply changed to the managerial view. So what does this mean? So view slightly changed from production to, can you see the slide clearly? Managerial view means that, let's say that this is the company, right? So which means that, so company, you are here, top. So what you need to do is just carrying your, say, supplier, company. So maintaining a very good relationship with each other. That's it. That was like stakeholder relationship in the past. However, what happened, especially like somewhere in 60s and 70s, was that the status of the top management started to change. As you see from the textbook, a lot of people start to argue that what about separating the role of the top management? In the past, the top management used to be the owner at the same time, which means that you own the company, at the same time you manage the company, right? So managers, owners are exactly like equal. The same person actually do own the company, but at the same time manage the company. So you are actually like a god in the company. But after somewhere like 60s and 70s, a lot of people start to say that the owner, and the manager here simply means 사장, right? Or CEO, should not be the same person, right? Separating the owner and manager. Why they start to argue the separation of between owner and manager? Why this is the issue suddenly come up? And still, kind of a controversy issue in management. The owner and manager should not be the same person. There should be owner, but they have to hire manager to manage the company. So we are going to talk about it in I think next week when we talk about corporate governance. Like arguing the separation between owner and manager means to make the management of the company more sound, clear, and straightforward. No corruption in managing this one. If you really own the company, but also if you manage the company, certainly you may manage the company for your benefit because you are the owner, right? However, if owner manager is separated, then the manager certainly manage the company for lots of shareholders, not the manager, owner of the firms. So separating owner, manager means try to pursue more sound, healthy management of the company. So that was a kind of an issue in the 60s and 70s. Because of that, the stakeholder approach moved from the production view and managerial view. So managerial view means you only need to look at the relationship with your supplier here. However, by separating owner and manager, you have to look at more good management internally, especially with your employees, for instance, and also with your owner and manager each other. Right? So that was actually concern. But what about now? Now we are having like stage of stakeholder approach, which means that this one is important. Maintaining good relation with the employees are also important. Also, customers important. Government relationship with government important, and community important. So like progress of stakeholder approach from production perspective to stakeholder perspective, I think that movement, that progress is quite apparent if you study the business like history, how companies actually progressed in their management. But the point is that as the environmental condition and also the industrial condition change, social issue changed, the stakeholder approach also changed. That is actually the point here. So that is actually how we can picturize what we just have talked here. So production view means that you are here from, so mostly you concern with your suppliers. Of course, concern your like customers is also important, but mostly your suppliers. However, the managerial view means that you have to look at the closest stakeholders around your firm. So that's how the stakeholder approach has changed. And this is now, again, how many the group, the company should look at for their management. Just simply by a glimpse of this picture, we can see that very complicated, right? A lot of groups here, right? The political involvement, social involvement, a lot of involvement, and also a lot of your key player to the firms. And for each stakeholders, there's a lot of also subgroup here. Say when you actually maintaining the right political, establishing political relationship, that does mean that you have to design how specifically you should form the relationship with your, say, local government, central government, and lots of institutions and so on. Right? So again, the key point here is that not all of these are critically important to your management. You have to choose, right? But choosing which one is, again, I'm just keep repeating the same the story here. Choosing which one is the most important group to your business is very tough decision, right? Sometimes you just simply ignore because you think that that's not really a powerful stakeholder group, not influencing your business, but you never know what that neglected or ignored stakeholder group may affect your business. I will talk about later, like, I don't know what is your favorable, the preferable noodle in here in the market. So I think a lot of you guys here may like, what's the number one noodle maker in Korea? Ramen, right? In Korea? Shinramen. What is the maker? Nongshim, right? So Nongshim is the, I think Nongshim is number one ramen maker, noodle maker in Korea, right? However, on the other hand, you know the Samyang ramen, so Samyang ramen, right? So it's number two. So I'm not pretty sure, but if you, that number one is Nongshim, right? Number two is Samyang. If you see the gap of that number one and two in market share, you can see certainly a wider gap here. So number two is far below than number one. But imagine, like, probably do you know the story of Samyang? Samyang, just Samyang to you, but to your father generation and to your grandfather generation, Samyang, the company, the brand itself was kind of a company, really a social company that saved the nation from the starvation, right? Like in 60s and even early 70s, somewhere there. Because of Samyang noodle, ramen, a lot of starved Korean people actually was able to feed themselves, right? So quite a CSR company, national company to solve the national problem. But suddenly the company truly a loved company by all people in Korea. So nobody dared to challenge the status, image, and reputation of Samyang. But suddenly that company simply collapsed all of a sudden and never came back to number one. So what was the mistake of the firm? That's the point. If you look at the story and case in more detail about Samyang noodle case, you can see it was a mistake of the company's stakeholder management. Right? They have chosen, they simply say, the company take too little about the, see here, what sounds is this? Take too little about the activity of a civic group mostly, and the criticism of the mass media because of what happened then, right? So they just trusted their quality, what they have done in the past, so they just thought that our status, our market shares are firm. Nobody challenged our status, but that was a mistake. So mistake in particular aspects of the stakeholder management actually destroy the company's name, reputation, and status. And exactly the opposite case you can also find from the Johnson & Johnson, which is American company. The Johnson & Johnson is very famous for Tylenol, and I know that you guys take the Tylenol for what? Headache, right? So Tylenol also number one in that specific area, but Tylenol also had the American company, right? The very same challenges from Civic Group, but the Tylenol, the Johnson & Johnson case correctly recognized what will be happening for that event, for that civic groups movement, and they act quickly. So so the Johnson & Johnson was able to keep the company's reputation and status. I will get back to you anyway. So the point is choosing what is the most important stakeholders. Very tough questions to answer from the company's perspective. So the real case, a lot of real company actually analyzing by drawing this kind of a map and try to see which one they have to pay attention more. Especially like environmentally very sensitive business like tire makers, for instance. You know that a lot of they produce like very, very bad chemicals to the air. So that kind of company also especially more sensitive on the choosing which stakeholders they have to find as their key stakeholders. So as a rule of thumb, what a lot of companies actually do from the beginning is that they just divide what is our primary stakeholders, what is our secondary stakeholders. So as you see, primary stakeholder means like kind of a group that affecting your business directly, and secondary stakeholder is group that affect your business indirectly. That doesn't mean, however, you pay less attention on the secondary stakeholders. Right? And some other theories, rather than dividing primary and secondary, what about dividing them into core stakeholders, strategic stakeholders, and environmental stakeholders? A little bit more specific because we have here 3 groups, right? Again, the point here is that grouping stakeholders into a specific mutually kind of exclusive one, and then setting strategy for each group is the job of the management system. Let's simply say what we call a stakeholder management. Right. So I just saw in the aisle a lot of high school students keep coming and going. So what happened today? Is it why there's a high school student here, there, and so you wear your, so you miss your high school, right? First day, so that's your uniform in the high school. So do you miss? No. No? You will be regret for that one. You will miss your high school soon, right? So, today is the first day, right? Manujar, right? So do you guys still enjoying that kind of day? Only today, right? So another way for you to dividing again, lots of shareholders, right? So simply by looking at this one, it's so confusing. So you have to find what is your most important stakeholder to care, what is less stakeholders to care. So primary, secondary, kind of one way to dividing them. Core, strategic, environmental stakeholder, another way to dividing them, or this may also quite academically kind of a very common method, very popular method to dividing the stakeholders. A lot of stakeholders out there, right here, inside, outside the organization. Dividing them by looking at their nature in terms of power, in terms of legitimacy, in terms of urgency. Right? So you have to remember this one, right? Power, legitimacy, urgency. Every stakeholders does have their own power, right? Every stakeholders here have their own specific degree of legitimacy, and the stakeholders also here does have a different degree of urgency for what they say, right? By measuring the degree of them, their power, legitimacy, and urgency, you can put these stakeholders somewhere inside the circle here. So number 7, for instance, if some stakeholders, in terms of these 3, say, nature, by using 3 nature, if some stakeholders located some area 7, for instance, kind of overlapping area, that means that stakeholders are very important to you. So you have to make plan for them. So that is actually the point here. Again, this is kind of a conceptual, a theoretical framework. So what kind of outcome result you have may be varying a lot depending on the industry type. Like power simply means what? Here, how much they can affect you. Like your customer, for instance, very powerful this day. Right? Today is pretty much more like customer-driven the market. Right? You have to make what they want, not they buy what you make. Right? So, if they say, like SNS, for instance, if the rumor spreading around SNS on your, say, a poor quality, then simply your sales and simply just out of the business. Your business is just, your product is just out of the business. So consumer probably may be very powerful stakeholders. However, like energy industry, for instance, consumer is ul, right? You know what is called ul, right? Their power is so not that strong. Right? So, like in oil business, if you just sell oil, like gas, whatever, the consumer just buy, not many choice, and you actually control everything. They just use whatever you produce, right? So that is what you mean by here power. Legitimacy. It's like how much the argument is actually acceptable, right? Say the labor union. What is labor union? A group of employees, right? 조합, 노동조합. Labor unions say we want, every one of us want, say, BMW. Pretty stupid claim, right? You don't need to, as a CEO, what they want. Not possible, very stupid argument, right? I want, say, a millionaire. I want to receive $1 million per month. So for that kind of claim, pretty much very weak, not really appropriate, not really valid argument. So you can ignore that one. So you can evaluate the possibility of realistics of the argument, reality of the argument. If that argument is quite realistic, then it is pretty much legitimacy. The degree of legitimacy is quite high. And urgency, on the other hand, some arguments need to be solved right now, or some argument or some claim can be delayed, can be negotiable, or and so on. So that is what we call urgency. So if you are really involved in particular company's business, you can certainly evaluate the stakeholders' legitimacy, power, and urgency. So another very good way of dividing the stakeholders for your need. But the point is, even after you dividing the stakeholders, for instance, how then you are going to manage them? That's another also task you have to figure out. In business study, I mean, you keep coming up with the some like strategic something, blah blah whatever. So strategic means what here? In business study, strategic means you do something by expecting, as you see here, with the kind of a long-term view, right? So that means for the benefit of long-term view or long-term benefit, you can certainly sacrifice a short-term profit or benefit. That's what strategic means mostly in business study. So based on your division of the stakeholders, you can manage them strategically. Listen what they say for the benefit of a long-term relationship, for instance. So you just act strategically, right? You act wisely. Sometimes you give up, or sometimes yield to them for their benefit, short term, but in the long term you will be the winner. So that is what we mean by strategic. Multi-fiduciary means that you just treat them all equally. Just like the we talked about a body shop case in our last session. They do a lot of good things, not only producing a cosmetic product, but also they do a lot of good things for the society, right? Poor kids, environment, a lot of things. So body shop case, their stakeholder approach is pretty much multi-fiduciary approach, right? So fiduciary simply means that you do something on behalf of the shareholder. So that means taking this approach means that you actually owe a lot to all of the stakeholders. So you have to treat them equally, which is pretty much idealistic approach. However, I'm not sure whether that is quite efficient way as a strategic in the stakeholder management. And finally, stakeholder synthesis approach means that you combine strategic approach plus moral behavior. So pretty much conceptual idea, but anyway, when you actually do something, that something should be done in a synthetic way, right? In very combined way. So finally, let's say that our company, my company, or your company is now doing a very good or very well stakeholder management. Let's say that my company is now doing very good, prepare very good stakeholder management. That means this is quite a well-defined one. A very good stakeholder management means that your company does have a clear answer upon this 5 question. You know, your company knows who are your most important stakeholders, and you know clearly what they want, and you know how to satisfy them in terms of economically, legally, ethically, and philanthropically, or what. So you know how to satisfy them, in economically satisfy them or legally satisfy them, and so on. So you know that. So that is question number 4 means. And then in practice, how your company really do. Right? So very good stakeholder management means the company have a clear answer and action plan upon these 5 questions. Very important. Before we go for break, I think this is how a company really do stakeholder analysis in the real cases. Like the slide that we see from our PowerPoint actually looks a little bit complicated, right? You just explain all of the processes here. However, this one is pretty much simplified that stakeholder analysis. Again, stakeholder analysis means who are the most important stakeholders and identify what they want and identify how to satisfy their wants and needs. Step by step here. Step 1. So, so this kind of a table is again very simple, right? Just list up stakeholders that you think important, and just list up what their interest and what they expect from you. Right here, like here, for instance, you say customer, and you say what they want, and you say what they want is really important to your business by putting the number. Number 1 means, satisfy what they want doesn't really important to your business. In that case, it is number 1, and you have to highly provide what they want. That's number 5. So you're just putting the number here depending on the importance of the stakeholders' interest and expectation. So just you list up like that in this kind of a table. And then, so in this case, you have 6 stakeholders. By putting the scores and their interests, you just locate them into, say, this table. say customer, for instance, what they want is really important to your business. You have to urgently satisfy them. So very high. And stakeholders' interest is kind of, say, negative. Right? For instance, customers feel that your service is really bad. So in that case, what they want is pretty much kind of a negative way. Right? That they want you to improve the kind of your service. So customers, as a stakeholder, tend to be somewhere located here. So point here, by putting that 6 stakeholders somewhere in this map, you can simply looking your stakeholders, say, kind of a map. You just feel like here, like looking at the map, right? So you just able to easily look at who are located where, right? Then you just design the action somewhere here upon some issues and so on. So yeah, that is really how the companies, what company really use for their stakeholder analysis. Right? Yeah, let's have a break and then briefly introduce how Samyang Ramen case, how Samyang's mismanagement of the stakeholders actually lead the company into a huge downturn and so on. And also I would say how Hankook Tire case really, what is Hankook Tires, for instance, stakeholder management. So you can see that one as well. Maintaining their position for a while and still they take that position. So what happened was this one. Like Samyang, actually, this is the picture of how like starvation of Korean people somewhere 50s, even 60s and beginning of 70s. Like the starvation, hunger was the kind of a problem in Korea. So again, this is Samyang ramen, right? So do you know this one? Still, I think the very classic ramen still on the market you can buy. I used to enjoy this one, but still I think the package, size, taste, exactly what your, say, grandfather generation used to have. Right? This one, like the kind of a best-selling ramen, not only providing food, but as I told you, solve the problem of starvation of Korean people. But the problem was this one. There was a kind of a rumor that the, I don't know, some jealousy guy or company may spread rumors like that Samyang use oil, this oil, the noodle made by like boiling through this oil, right? Mostly, actually this is the kind of a Japanese technology, and that oil is like a vegetable palm oil. Right? That's how the kind of a classic recipe of ramen making is that the ramen boiled in that vegetable palm oil, but Nongshim known to use a kind of a cow oil, a kind of an industrial oil. But it is fine. Industrial oil is still eatable and better one than when you compare like Japanese ramen and Korean ramen. I think Korean ramens tend to have more firm and like firm texture, right? 꼬들꼬들. I don't know how we can say that in compared to Japan. Like Korean ramens are pretty much firm, 꼬들꼬들, because of using this oil. The usage of oils are different. Japanese using vegetable palm oil, and Koreans are using cow oil, uji. I don't know in Korean. So the cow oil, which is, but that cow oil in USA known as industrial oil, part of the industrial oil category. However, in Korea it is kind of eatable oil. So it is industrial oil. However, it is eatable, but that fact distorted, right, and spread to the public in the wrong way. So just like Samyang using wrong oils to feed people, which was wrong. But the point was that, so that was initiated by some guy and ignite kind of a civic movement at the time, somewhere like 80s or something. But as I told you, like Nongshim was like national company, so they thought that they can ignore. They thought that we can ignore that part because we are beloved company. Everybody like our ramen, so we don't need to do that kind of a rubbish rumor. So that was their mistake of their stakeholder management. But anyway, unfortunately, that kind of a rumor just become like spread everywhere in the world, and suddenly the consumers start turning into like boycotting buying that Nongshim ramen. So that's why their market share dropped. It was too late for Nongshim to react that kind of a boycotting movement by that kind of a grassroots anti-buying that Samyang noodle. So it kind of a too late reaction to that movement, because I told you like the Nongshim, Samyang just trust too much themselves. They only care their customer, their product, their buyer, suppliers, ignoring what mass media describe themselves and so on. So there was kind of mismanagement. But unfortunately, because of that, that case now went to the court, and finally the court sentenced that Nongshim use of that oil is not guilty. It is fine. It is part of industrial oil, but still eatable and more eatable oil. So no problem of using that one. But it was too late. Anyway, during the lengthy process of legal litigation, a lot of other ramen makers suddenly take that chance by jumping into the market. So they used to have only 2 players at that year, but now they have many other players here. So that's how the like stakeholder managements are so important. But yeah, Tylenol actually did quite opposite one. So very famous case. I think the Tylenol case may be a kind of exam question for your university like essay exam and so on. So somebody took the Tylenol and killed. And because I think that a particular guy who hated Tylenol or Johnson & Johnson put poison on the Tylenol and spread the rumors like Tylenol's operation of the pill making is wrong. So Tylenol is actually killing people. So what Tylenol did was that rather than ignoring that fact, what they did was they recall all of their pill. Recall is not only done in car company, but also in that pharmaceutical one as well. So they recall it, redesign everything from here to there. So there's this kind of a cap here, pretty much open, right? You can open and you can put poison in that cap, through the cap, but by redesigning, by putting some seal here, so you just cannot put poison in that Tylenol. So so what Tylenol did was that recall all of the Tylenol and redesign like this, and also at the same time the Tylenol is investigate what was the real problem. Then they find that it was not really the problem of the drug itself or manufacturing, but the problem of, but somebody put poison inside the case, right? So it was not really the mistake of the Johnson & Johnson. Right? Somebody did the bad things to the pill here. But the reaction of the Johnson & Johnson was quite remarkable. Recalling all of the Tylenol means the company sacrificed, right, millions of dollars of sales. Right? If Samyang did the same things upon that, like rumors, if the Samyang did the same thing, like recalling all of the, whether they are innocent or what, if they recall all of their ramen and investigate the case, probably that action may ensure more trust from the customers. But Samyang didn't do that kind of a reaction. But Johnson & Johnson did this one. Even though this was not the mistake of the Johnson, this is how Johnson actually did. And also, they redesigned the pill like this kind of a, what you call a jelly cap, like jelly. Before they invent this one, the pill was like the pill, the kind of pill that we are eating. But after that case, the Johnson & Johnson made new types of pill, like jelly types of pill like this. So nobody can open your pill and put some poison, right? So nobody can put poison in these jelly types of pill, right? So even though it was not the mistake of the Tylenol or Johnson & Johnson, the reaction of Johnson & Johnson was actually quite aggressively done to make sure that we are do whatever we do for the safety of the customers, even though it is not our mistakes. So that is kind of a good case of stakeholder management. Simply say, we don't ignore any stakeholders' argument or suggestion, claim. Right? So this is also, on the other hand, Hankook Tire's stakeholder management. When he say that Hankook Tire's, I think #1 tire company in Korea, and I think number somewhere 5 or 6 in the world as a tire maker. So as you say, the tire industry is pretty much industry environment sensitive one. So carrying the stakeholders' claim is really important to the firm. So what Hankook Tire did is by putting stakeholders inner circle here, they consider this one as their primary stakeholders, and some of the external circle one here is their secondary stakeholders. So that's how they divide stakeholders. Interestingly, 지역사회, community used to be the secondary stakeholders, right? But Hankook Tire case, they just put this one as their primary stakeholders. Again, ecology, nature, climate, also group of people on this area, Hankook Tire consider as their primary. These are mostly the secondary stakeholders, but not to the Hankook Tire case. And government, local government. Interestingly, competitor mostly tend to be part of the primary stakeholders, but not to the Hankook Tires. They put competitors as their secondary shareholders. What does that mean? When you actually manage the company, competitors are always #1 target for your analysis for whatever purpose. Because competitors are the most powerful stakeholders that impacting your business, obviously, but not to the Hankook Tire case. So what does that mean? They are confident for their leadership, market share. So competitor is not of our primary business. Probably they may be their idea here, but I think from the bigger picture, we can simply see how Hankook Tire actually view the stakeholders for the firm. Quite a unique map, if you look at here. very unusual. I'm not really supporting guy of Hankook Tire, but no relationship. But anyway, that map looks quite interesting to myself, so I just put this one. And so this is how their strategy of stakeholder management, right? I'm sorry for Korean here, which means not on the exam. 이해관계적 like stakeholders analysis, and then start planning something. 대화 설계 schedule. Probably the planning is like discussion, right? Talking with the stakeholders and then deciding. This is the real company case, right? And as we already discussed in the textbook, they just decide who will be the target for discussion and dialogue and receiving what they want. And we propose what kind of commitment the company show to the shareholders. And they set up how to implement their commitment. And then they report what would be their outcome with the stakeholders, relationship, discussion, dialogue. And then they also receive the feedback from the stakeholders. And then that feedback reflected for their next year planning and so on. So this is a kind of a all-year-round process of stakeholder management. So again, like textbook description, you may think that it is quite kind of too much textbook styles of description, but in the real company case, they are actually how they do, right? Which means stakeholders are really important to the success of the firm. Again, I told you this kind of a chart here, right? This one, right? This kind of chart. So, stakeholder analysis. For practical use, they use this chart, like how actually the Hankook Tire used that chart for the company's 3 years practice, dividing stakeholders group, describing what they want, and setting the strategy to satisfy what they want here. That's pretty much stakeholder management. If you just see the chart here, sounds easier. However, filling the space here is really a time-consuming job, right? So let us finish here, and we look at also another case of POSCO. We know that POSCO is one of the leading Korean companies, not only Korea but globally. POSCO stakeholder management also kind of a classic example of good stakeholder management. If you look at how their stakeholder management changed over the past few decades, it deserves quite not only the research but also practical implication. So we are going to look at the POSCO case next Tuesday. Okay, have a great weekend. Okay.